Over the past decade and a half, the field of communication and media studies in Chile has grown considerably, in particular through the work of a young generation of scholars who have become very well known in the international space. How did this happen? About this and many other fascinating topics is this conversation with Teresa Correa in this new episode of El Café Latinx. What is the experience of being a Latinx or Latin American scholar in the field of communication and media studies? What are the main challenges and opportunities that come with our identities? These are the issues that we'll talk about in El Café Latinx, where some of the leading voices in the field will share their professional experiences. Hola, my name is Pablo Boczkowski. I teach at Northwestern University, where I hold the Hamid bin Khalifa Al Thani Chair in Communication. Together with Mora Matassi, doctoral student at Northwestern and executive producer of this podcast, we invite you to discover the journeys of scholars who are at the cutting edge of creating knowledge about Latinx or Latin American communities across the Americas. These are our stories. Esas son nuestras historias. Estas son nuestras historias. Welcome to this new episode of El Café Latinx. I am thrilled to have with us today Teresa Correa, who's Associate Professor in the School of Communications at Universidad Diego Portales in Santiago de Chile. She's been there since 2012, first as an assistant professor, and since 2017 as an associate professor. A couple of years ago, she was also Tinker visiting professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And since 2019, in addition to her professorial duties, she is director of the Research Center CICLOS, the Research Center in Communication, Literature, and Social Observation, also at Universidad Diego Portales. Teresa did her undergraduate at Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile, where she took a BA in Journalism and Social Information, and then did her graduate work at the University of Texas at Austin with a master's degree in Latin American Studies first, and then a PhD in Communication. Teresa is one of the most prolific scholars in the region, probably one of the leading authorities in issues of social inequality, stratification, skills in relation to digital media. She has published more than 40 journal articles in the top journals in the field, has been highly and widely cited, and has received many grants, both from national foundations in Chile and also international organizations throughout the Americas, actually. So, Teresa, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to El Café Latinx.
Thank you so much. Thank you for such a nice introduction. Thank you. I think this is a great idea to have this cafe or this podcast. So I'm glad to be talking to you. Thank you, Pablo.
Thank you very much. Most deserve everything that I said. So, my friend, how did it all begin? How was the start of the journey that led you to become a professor?
I would say that it started in my college years. Here, when you're doing your college years, you have the opportunity to be TA, teaching assistant. That doesn't happen much in the US, for example. But when you're a junior or a senior, you can be TA. So I was TA. I liked the academic life, but I was studying journalism. So in my final years of my college degree, I did a student exchange. So I didn't have the English, so I had to study English to do the TOEFL. So that was important for me because I wanted to go abroad and experience living abroad. And I went to Vancouver, Canada. And there I took classes in other social science departments, in sociology and in political science. And that deepened the interest in being and pursuing an academic life. But when I came back, I started working at a newspaper, but with this dream that I wanted to pursue graduate studies. At that point, it was just a master, but then, so I started working at a newspaper. I worked there for 3 years, but with this plan of going back and pursuing graduate studies. In the middle, I met someone who became my husband, and we shared this same dream because we engaged and we started talking about these plans that we both had, and we ended up doing them together. So that's how I applied, and I started doing a master's in Latin American studies, because in the beginning, after I had been reporting in issues as social policy, education, when I was a reporter, I was doing education, social policy, stuff about international relations. So I thought that I wanted to do a master's in the beginning, but then a PhD in one of those fields, in sociology or in public policy or in political science. But then when I started my master's in Latin American studies at the University of Texas at Austin, which is a great program that allowed me to take different classes, in social policy. I took classes on inequality in Latin America, in public policy, in sociology. I took these classes, and I realized half of the way that a better approach, for me at least, was to integrate and not like break with my past or the career that I had built doing journalism and being a reporter, but integrate both. And that's how I applied to the PhD, but with the idea of pursuing like inequalities and media representation in the beginning, and then inequalities and digital technologies. And now my research is a lot about public policies and policy making and digital technologies. So I incorporated this interest in education, in social policy, in public policy with communication and media. Yeah, I would say that was my start.
Interesting. So you built on your work in journalism, you built on your focus on policy issues, the region, etc. So as you moved along, it seems that you kept adding and integrating rather than leaving behind, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I ended up doing. But I have to admit that the process was not as straightforward or as easy in the process of decision making that seems, Of course, in the beginning, I thought that I was not gonna do journalism anymore, and I wanted to do other social sciences, and so I started like flirting with all these different areas. And that process was tense, and making the decision of whether I come back to communication and how can I integrate all this interest and build a career out of all this interest that I had. So although it seems very linear, it was bumpy and hard at times. Yeah.
Okay. So, and how was, in general, the experience of being a graduate student in the US coming from Latin America?
What a good question. It was a good, I have to say that I started with the Master in Latin American Studies, which you coming from Latin America, you would say, why do you want to do a Master in Latin American Studies? But it provided me with this integral or more global perspective on the different issues of Latin America that you don't have when you're 20 something, and second when you come from within one of the countries, but it was good. Like professionally, I took classes with great professors, And personally, it was también. I was going to say también too. It was also interesting. We had fun. We created a group of masters and PhD students. It was fun, and we did this journey like side by side with this community of grad students. It was fun. It was also challenging. So that part was fun, but it was also challenging. You don't have the language, and that's you don't really have the language. You have some language, but you're not an English speaking person, and that makes everything very challenging. Also, I would say as a woman in the beginning, I had like confidence issues in terms of when I was a grad student in a seminar in which they would say, Teresa, what do you think about and this big question? And I would like come up with an answer, of course, but afterwards I would say, was it right? Was I able did people understand what I was trying to say? I don't know, like thinking about all that. So in another language with these initial confidence issues, things are challenging. So it was fun, but very challenging at the same time.
Okay, interesting. Now, which university did you go to when you were in Vancouver? UVA or?
University of British Columbia.
UBC, sorry, not UVA, UBC. Okay,
yeah.
So how would you compare? I mean, you experience academic cultures in both the US and Canada. How do they compare in your experience? Even though these are two particular institutions, but nonetheless.
Wow, it's let me think. Canada, it's like the thing is that the contexts are so different because Austin and Texas has nothing to do with British Columbia, and Vancouver. So when I went to Vancouver, I in terms of the classes, that was my first experience of for example, being in a class with 300 or 400 students, with having these group discussions, that then when I was a grad student, I had to lead those group discussions and everything, So this environment was totally different, but it was interesting enough to the point that I said, I want to come back at least to North America and do graduate studies. And this is what I want. I really want that. Like to know the diversity of people and exchange experiences with such a diverse group was very interesting and fun. Then Austin is different. Texas has this Latino background in which you feel part of it in a way. You are not really, because you're an international still, but you feel more connected. It like the vibe was different in Austin in that sense. But I still I was still able to see world-class professors who were doing like great research, and that kept me going, and they were pushing me, and I like that approach. I like the approach that in which they push you by giving you incentives and offering you opportunities. If you do well, they give you more and more opportunities rather than being like negative or saying to you negative things. It's the other way around. It's just, if you do well, you get benefits, you get involved in projects. They pat at your back and say, keep going. I really like that approach, and I try to do it here.
Okay. So we'll go back to the work in Chile in a few minutes, but So when you were deciding on graduate programs, did you only look within the US? Did you look at other countries? And why Texas, Austin?
Well, yeah, I looked in the US. Yeah. But to be honest, you have to start like negotiating if you want, if both of you, in this case, my partner and I wanted to do like share this dream, you have to negotiate some stuff, to be honest. So this was a good idea. Because in my case, Texas and Texas at Austin had this program of Latin American studies because I was not totally confident exactly what I wanted to do. So this would provide me with the opportunity to look around and see different programs and take different classes, and then really decide what I really wanted to do. And it's in Latin America literature. It has the best professors who are experts in Latin America in social science. So yeah, that was a great opportunity.
So that's why Austin. And when you were finishing up, you went back immediately or directly to Chile, right after you graduated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you consider staying in the States or working in other countries? How was that process?
Yeah. In the beginning, we even considered like living in other Latin American countries, and of course, staying there was a huge possibility. I was there, like I had been there for 5 or 6 years at that point. So one possibility was to stay, although we were on a Fulbright. And at that time, when you are on a Fulbright, it's hard to get a work permit. Okay, so you can do an OPT, you can do some short-term job, but okay. So that was one thing. We had known people who had navigated and who had stayed. But that was one issue. And the other issue is that we also wanted to come back. So I wanted to come back, and there was this tension and negotiation, even within myself, what we want to do, what I want to do. But I thought that I had this goal of coming back to Chile and create a hub of good research in communication that we could create with among many other researchers or graduate students who were at that time in the UK or in other parts of Europe or in the US who were doing research in communication and media. We wanted, and I wanted to come back and build that and become a hub of a small but good, productive researchers. Who can say something from Latin America. So that was one of the most important goals. And of course, coming back to your colors, to your context, to your place in a way, it also lured me.
So how did you manage to build that group? Because it's true, I mean, there have been in the past decade an explosion of research coming from Chile, in explosion in a good way, so massive growth in quantity and quality. And so there are great researchers at your Universidad Diego Portales, at Católica in Chile, in Santiago, Católica in Valparaíso, Adolfo Ibáñez, Universidad de Chile. So there are at least a dozen, scholars who are incredibly well published, whose international impact is very high. And there wasn't that before, right? 20 years ago, that did not really exist. Everybody who I have in mind are people who are very young. and still have many decades ahead of them in terms of research. So how did that happen? How did you manage to do that?
No, it's not that we did it, but I think it was like there are different things. One, the government had these great scholarships for people who wanted to pursue graduate studies abroad, like masters and PhDs. So that triggered that many people, like not many, but a group of people would get good training. Okay, both in I would say mostly Europe and North America. That was one thing. The other thing is that, well, there had been like important communication scholars in the past in Chile. They had been, but after this critical mass went and studied and did their training and came back, we started to build this network, and many times we worked together, and we wanted to and we had already been in the conferences in IMCR or ICA or AJMC in the case of communication, and also Latin American conferences in communication. And there is even a Chilean now. There is a Chilean not only conference but association of communication. So yeah, that all happened pretty much at the same time, in about 8 years ago or 10 years ago. So we started like building networks, having these conferences, publishing together, and I think we mentored each other in a way, all of us. So we pushed us to send staff, submit papers to the global conferences and publish. And once some of them already do it, others follow, and one teach the other ones. And I think that's how we have done it. I don't know if I have like how exactly you do it, but it's pretty much building this community and supporting each other, I would say.
It's interesting now.
And having that goal in mind, that has been, but because the goal was clear.
The goal was clear in your mind or in most of your colleagues' minds?
In my mind, and I would say that others, and we would talk about it.
You would talk about it?
Yeah, we would talk about it. That's our goal. Yeah.
So it sounds almost like a social movement in a sense.
The academic social movement of communication. Yeah.
Yeah, but so let me ask you a question then. Underlying this, if I understand this correctly, or at least this is what I interpret from your narrative, there is like a communitarian ethos that is somewhat different from the more individualistic one that prevails in North America, US, and even Canada, and also in most places in continental Europe or the UK, right? So it's a different take on how to build a national academic community. Am I right in interpreting this?
Totally. I think it's way more collective. Because we know that each of us by ourselves are nothing, like there could be like 2 great scholars who do excellent research, but it's nothing. You need a critical mass, because if you get a critical mass of people, you can collaborate. So it's been very collectivist. For example, and just to give you an example, now with CICLOS, this Center for Communication, Literature, and Social Observation, it's a long name, but we wanted to do the acronym of CICLOS. So in this group, we are academics within the School of Communication at Diego Portales, from the different schools of the College of Communication. And we're not that many, we're 8, 9, but we get together once a month, and the idea is to share our challenges. It's not just to show what we're doing, but the perspective that we come from, it's okay, we're going to show what we're doing, but also from the challenges. I'm facing this. How do you do when you're trying to publish this and you get this review? I'm trying to apply to this grant, but I'm struggling with the methodological design. What do you think could be more successful or good? Or it's totally collaborative. And that's more formal now, but it had happened informally. Yeah, it also happens that it's small, so we know each other, So
it's all in the same city, right? I mean, almost everybody's in Santiago.
Many, yeah, but there are good scholars as well in the south, at Universidad La Frontera. But Chile is very centralized, and that's a problem. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting cultural difference when it comes to comparing the reality that you describe and the academic reality of people in the States or in England or Germany. So how about teaching? Because in previous conversations with colleagues who are in Latin America in this podcast, many of them remark that teaching has a different presence in the academic life than when it has in the States. Has that been your experience based on your own experience teaching in Chile, experience TA in the States, and also talking to colleagues and friends who are in the States? Is that also applying in your case?
You mean just by teaching, or
the role that teaching has, centrality or not centrality? Like, for instance, some people say that in Latin American universities, it has more of a central and integral part of the scholarly experience, whereas in the States it's more sort of separated. I mean, something completely different from the world of research, and sometimes not given as much attention. Would you say that is also the case for you?
Yeah, I would say that teaching is important. In my case, I love teaching. I teach classes that I like as well, and the school has respected that, and they keep offering me the classes that I really like to teach, and I'm good at teaching, I guess. So in that way, they keep me motivated. I cannot say much about other schools, but if you have a strong research agenda and funds, and you're publishing, but particularly funded projects, they don't overload you with teaching. In my case, I do a 2-2, like 2 classes per semester, and even now that I'm director of Ciclos, they allow me to do like 3 classes a year. So I think teaching is important, but if you build a strong research agenda, they also respect that. I suppose in various universities, I don't know if all of them, but I cannot say from my experience, at least just my experience, that it has been a burden, that I cannot do anything else but teaching. If that's the idea, that's not. That hasn't been my case, at least. Yeah.
Right. And so switching from teaching to research, how do you pick your research topics, right? I mean, you mentioned, at the beginning, this sort of journey where you sort of build on, each stage, so to speak, and so each stage sort of stays with you, right? And it acquires probably a different meaning, but how have you chosen the different research topics, and sort of how have you sort of put together your research program, so to speak?
They have been different. I can say that I've been involved in, in my life, because they're big projects. So 5 or 6 in which I had to think, okay, what I'm going to do. The first ones, when I was given that, sometimes a graduate student may be hearing this, when I was a graduate student just starting my PhD, and I wanted to combine this idea of social policy and inequality, but also digital media, because I thought that was really important. I thought, okay, and I didn't have any fund to do research, so I said, we are going to explore, this was about 2008, yeah. I'm going to explore inequalities among the connected and the connected people and college students. And so that's why I first brought my two worlds together, okay? About like inequalities and policies and communication and digital technologies. So I kept doing, plus other things, but that was one of my main. I kept doing that until my dissertation years. When I had to propose for my dissertation, I had been doing work on digital inequality, and I said, we know that within families, for example, we know that kids could be different names, digital media brokers or change agents within their families, and they could bring technologies. Why don't we explore that phenomenon? So rather than focusing just on inequalities, let's see how in the day-to-day life, someone or a group of people in a social system, which could be the household, or it could be the school, etc., they could become brokers and mediate the technological worlds and the ideas outside and bring them to their homes, particularly in disadvantaged populations. Again, because I was particularly interested in more vulnerable populations in my research in general. So that's how I came up with this idea, and I had the support of Joe Strobar, who was my advisor at that time and who was doing research in digital inequality in Austin. So we started exploring this topic. And then when I was finishing my dissertation, I was in a social gathering. So now I'm going to talk about serendipity, that you have to be aware. I was in a social gathering in Austin, and I met this Chilean woman who asked me just to get a conversation with me. What do you do? So I was trying to explain that I do digital inequality or inequalities and digital media, and trying to, I don't know, this is a struggle that academics have, that we do have, in order to explain to other people what we do. And she said, just to engage in a conversation, I guess. I work at a telecommunication company, and she named me the telecommunication company, Chile. And we're doing this program in which we are connecting isolated villages. And we're providing antennas with isolated villages. And I said, that's my next, after my dissertation, that's my next thing. I want to go to those villages and see what happened with those people when infrastructure access has been provided. Do they adopt it or not? Why yes, why no? So I applied. That was my first grant. So I came back to Chile, and that was my first grant. Digital inclusion in isolated rural communities when access had been provided. And I spent the next 3 or 4 years doing that. And I realized doing that mobile connections was a big deal, that mobile-only use was increasingly prevalent. So I wanted to see the implications of mobile-only use. And that was my second big grant. And now I want to come back to the rural communities after the pandemic, That's what I'm going to do and see what happens. So yeah, that's pretty much how. Did I answer your question?
Yes. And so then I have a follow-up. So your work is theoretically informed, but you have a very concrete social relevance dimension to your research program, right?
Yeah.
and it is probably grounded in the years that you spent as a reporter covering issues on social policy, etc. Have you ever thought about doing policy work yourself? Or do you consult for policy agencies?
If I have considered doing like policy, being a policymaker myself, no.
Okay.
No,
Would
no.
you?
I prefer to be in the expert consultant side of the desktop.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So no, I haven't. But yes, and I like to keep my connections with the Ministry of Agriculture, with the Undersecretary of Telecommunication, like the Office of Telecommunication, Ministry of Education. So not just as a consultant, but if they want to do anything, a seminar or something, sometimes they ask me to share my results. Yeah, to keep those connections for me is important, but as an academic, and I'm totally confident about that. Yeah, I like being an academic. I like having approaching this topic from when you don't have political issues that you have to deal with, coming from more of an, we all biased, but more from an I don't want to say objective, but from an academic point of view, more of an skeptical and see what happens. Yeah, so I like the theoretical work as well. Like when you are trying to problematize and trying to use what has been done in the past and what has been proposed theoretically to solve those issues. Yeah.
Okay. Now, and you've been very, very successful at publishing those problematizations and the findings. Many of her articles draw from data in Chile, and mostly published in the top journals in English-speaking language. So, how has that journey been about trying to publish in English in the top journals in the field with data from a country less than 20 million population, right?
Yeah.
So how has that experience been?
We know the trick now. No.
Is there a trick?
Well, no, it's not really a trick. But first, I have access thanks to these funds, and we have access, I would say, even when you ask me about the Chileans and the hub and everything, we do have access to good data. I still have, it's kind of affordable. It's very expensive, but still affordable to do face-to-face surveys. That's going to decrease, of course, but to have do a panel survey face-to-face, it's really good data. So in that sense, we have that opportunity. We don't have just college samples as I used to have when I didn't have funding and I was in the US. And nothing against college samples, because that's at that point everything was theory, and now I'm dealing with theory, good data, and in my case, policy implications. So good data, but it's not that. I would say that it's really answering questions that that everyone wants to or making questions that everyone is making them, coming up with good questions and thinking, okay, this is important, but not just for Chile. This is important for Chile in my case, but I'm also contributing and contributing to the literature, the global literature, or the knowledge, the global knowledge, and coming up with an argument or coming up with a question or how I'm going to approach this and make this important not just for Chileans, but for everyone else, has been the main challenge. And I devote a lot of my time in doing that. Yeah, and I would say so. Coming up with a good big question, and then of course justifying Chile, and I have a problem with that as well, because I think like research, and we know that the research it's all context dependent, and we all should say why collecting data in the US or in Canada or in Germany or whatever contributes to the literature, but justifying the context and explaining the context. We have to do that way more often than I would like. I would like everyone to do it. I would say that coming up with those questions, I spend a lot of time doing that. Yeah, and in my publications, in everything. Yeah, does that answer?
How do you do that? How do you come up with good questions?
No, it's not, or like things that
questions that would yield good research, right? Because I agree with you, it's one of the most difficult things to do.
Yeah,
so what have you learned? Because you've done it many times and successfully. So what have you learned that works, at least for you?
For example, I'm going to give an example with the rural communities, with the question about the rural communities. If you think who could be interested in studying when it was 2013 or 14, antennas or internet access, we were worried about social media and content sharing and online political participation. Those were the questions. So how you come up with a question that is interesting, even for the Journal of Computer Mediated Communication, that comes from internet connection in rural communities. So there, I thought, now a great amount of people are connected. So there are still communities or groups who are not. And I think that we cannot approach them with the same way that we have approached the people who are already connected. I think they are facing very specific challenges that we have to know, because in order to promote or pursue even further the digital inclusion process, we cannot keep doing the same that we have been doing. We reached at the point we reach a plateau. So how do we reach? What do we do? What are the challenges of those contexts, of those very, very vulnerable contexts? So that was pretty much the thought process and the way that I approach it and the way that I problematized. Now that everyone is connected, we still have some groups, but these groups are different because they're lagging well behind. We really need to understand their context and their contextual factors, their meso-level factors, their social networks, and how this isolated context, for example, has permeated their individual characteristics of motivations or attitudes. So in that sense, so that's why, for example, I drew from structuration theory of Anthony Giddens, just to understand the context, the meso level, and the individual, and how all of them interact. So that's how I approach it, and it was useful because I really realized how important the isolated context was for them, and kept them excluded, and what this means. So that could be an example.
Okay, thank you. Now you mentioned just a few minutes ago that as an author, typically writing with Chilean data, you are routinely asked to contextualize your findings, but you think that request should be made of all authors, right? Regardless of whether they work data from Chile or from Canada or from Bangladesh.
We're doing social science. Yeah, it's topics depend. But yeah.
So are there any things that if you had magical powers and were granted one wish about how you'd like for the field of communications and media studies to change, that you wish for? And is there anything that your maximum wish about how you'd like for the field to change?
Yeah, this question reminds me of a question that my kids usually do to me, which is, which superpowers would you like to have? And that's an awesome question. Of course, I would like to have many superpowers. So I would say, and I answer them. One thing that they look at me and say, what do you mean? I would like to have perspective of history. Like now that we are going through this convulsed, agitated times in general, and now I'm going to talk about communication, but in general, I would like to know what this moment means in the long run. What are the changes? What are the changes that are going to remain, that are going to change as a society? Which ones are not? And what's our position in history? Because we know that we are going through drastic changes. And so in communication, I also would like to have that perspective of history perspective, because we know in communication that, well, in communication, things usually change, but in the past 15 years, they have been changing like drastically. And I would like to have that perspective to see, and we're trying to come up, we're trying to come up with way of explaining these changes, and we come with different theoretical concepts. And I don't know, just to name a few, just to understand social movements, connective action, effective publics. And when I was working with people from Wisconsin, we came up with the idea of network acknowledgement. We are resuscitating all theories as well, like selective exposure, just to try to understand what we are going through. So if I would have a superpower, I would like to have the perspective of history to see what this means in the long run, in the history of communication, in the how the paradigm is changing, and how can we solve some stuff? What are the things that worked out and did not work out, in order to, for example, the things that concern us or concern me, I don't know, the biases in algorithms, or the digital inequalities in the reception of people. What are the best approaches to solve this, now that the governments are thinking about regulations, and governments around the world are thinking about regulations, how to manage data and how to manage these biases? What things this perspective of history would give me, like lessons on how to apply that. Now, going like, if you think about like a magical power, I would like to have that always. And regarding more of our field, and what's the position of Latin America in the field of communication, of course, I would like for people from the global South to reach positions of power in the associations that are the gatekeepers of where the field is going, pretty much. I think that I would like to add our perspective, our challenges, the things that we have to deal with, not being English natives, for example, or having different perspectives on the field. I would like to have that. And the last thing that I would like to have is that communication is a new field. It's somewhat a newer field compared to sociology, political science, psychology. But now we're becoming important. If you see, for example, the journals, political communication is #1 in political science. Information communication and society is 4 in sociology. And I would like for all the other social science to realize that I don't know if they have it, but but yeah, I would say that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Teresa. This has been a fascinating conversation. I have learned a lot, and I have now many more questions in my mind, but I know you are busy, so I'll let you go. I want to thank you again for sharing your time and wisdom with us. I want to thank all the listeners for staying with us to the end, and invite everybody to join us for the next episode of El Café Latinx.
Thank you so much, Pablo. Thank you so much.
El Café Latinx is a production of the Center for Latinx Digital Media in the Department of Communication Studies at Northwestern University. I am Pablo Boczkowski, your host, and I'm joined by executive producer Mora Matassi.